It's amazing how quickly things change, right? One minute, everything's normal in North Carolina. The next, Hurricane Helene slams the coast.
It's devastating.
Total devastation, yeah.
Yeah.
Homes wrecked, businesses flooded.
Yeah.
It's a long road to get back to normal. And right when people need help the most, especially those SBA disaster loans, that's when this news about the Biden administration sending aid to Lebanon breaks.
Right.
And understandably, it's got people talking.
It really puts a spotlight on just how complicated these aid decisions are. You've got Americans reeling from a natural disaster, trying to, navigate the bureaucracy of getting federal help. And at the same time, you have Lebanon,
Yeah.
a country already facing a humanitarian crisis made even worse by this recent conflict with Israel. It forces us to ask, how do you decide whose needs come first when there are multiple crises happening at once?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And this Fox News article we're looking at today really digs into that tension. You see pictures of folks in North Carolina going through what's left of their belongings, trying to salvage anything they can. And you can hear the urgency in their voices, when they talk about trying to get those SBA loans.
And those loans, of course, are meant to be a lifeline in these exact situations. But even when things are running smoothly, the process can be so slow and complicated.
Oh, absolutely. It's a nightmare, even at the best of times, so you can imagine how much harder it is now.
And that's what makes this whole thing with Lebanon even more, well, let's just say interesting. While the Biden administration's out here asking Congress for more disaster relief money because of Hurricane Helene, they've also gone ahead and sent aid to Lebanon, seemingly without waiting for Congress to give the green light.
Right.
So right away, it brings up these questions about the different ways funding works and how much power the executive branch actually has to allocate resources, especially when you're comparing foreign aid to, disaster relief here at home.
Yeah, it's complicated, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, on the one hand, the executive branch has traditionally had more flexibility when it comes to international aid, particularly in emergencies.
Right.
But for something like disaster relief here in the U.S., especially for things like SBA loans, it often comes down to whether Congress approves the funds, which can take a lot longer. And that's where things get really interesting.
And this whole thing about how the funding works, plus, everyone's on edge because of the hurricane, it basically creates this, recipe for controversy.
Oh, for sure.
And this is where this Fox News article we're looking at really takes you into the thick of it. It takes us right into a White House press briefing where things got, pretty heated.
Yeah, that briefing was definitely a turning point in this whole story. You had Fox News reporter Peter Doocy really grilling Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre on this whole aid to Lebanon thing.
Right.
He kept bringing up how the administration was asking Congress for more money for North Carolina, but had no problem sending funds to Lebanon right away. And he really honed in on some of Biden's past comments about how budgets reflect an administration's values.
Yeah.
It seemed like he was trying to make it look like the administration had its priorities all mixed up.
And the really interesting thing about that whole exchange is how both Doocy and Jean-Pierre used their words to try and control how people saw the situation.
For sure.
Jean-Pierre, on the defensive, kept accusing Doocy of spreading disinformation and misinformation.
Yeah, and those words have become so common in politics these days, and they often signal this deeper battle over, who gets to decide what's true.
Exactly.
It's are they really worried about facts being wrong, or are they just trying to shut down questions they don't want to answer?
Right. It's really hard to tell sometimes.
It is.
And then you have Doocy, who's framing his questions to make the whole thing seem hypocritical, if they can send aid to Lebanon without Congress's, okay, why not do the same for North Carolina?
Right.
It's a very deliberate way of using words to plant seeds of doubt and maybe even sway public opinion.
Totally. And this goes back and forth for a while, with Doocy refusing to let up. He even went as far as asking if Biden's letter to Congress asking for more money for those SBA loans was misinformation, since they just sent money to Lebanon without asking.
Wow.
Talk about a gotcha moment, right?
Yeah.
And the only thing Jean-Pierre could say was that Congress needed to do their job, which, I don't know.
It's not the strongest defense.
Not the super convincing argument. Anyway, the whole thing ends with Jean-Pierre basically ending the briefing right then and there and practically storming out. It definitely left people feeling like the administration was hiding something.
The fact that the briefing ended so abruptly definitely makes you think. It shows just how sensitive this whole issue is and how much the administration's struggling to keep up appearances. They want to come across as, calm and in control, handling both domestic and international crises. But it seems like the pressure's starting to get to them.
Yeah. And the court of public opinion. Not exactly letting them off easy, are they?
Not at all. This Fox News article goes on to talk about how people are reacting on social media, especially the backlash against Vice President Harris.
Yeah, they've been pretty brutal.
It's a lot of criticism. The article even mentions a tweet from Texas Governor Greg Abbott, where he compares the situation to Hurricane Katrina and calls it Kamala's Katrina.
Oh, wow.
And that comparison, well, it's pretty loaded, don't you think?
That's not a comparison you make lightly.
Yeah.
It brings up all these images of the government totally dropping the ball, of politicians who are totally out of touch with what regular people are going through.
Right.
I mean, regardless of whether you think it's an accurate comparison or not, the fact that people are making it and that it's resonating with some people, well, that says something. It tells us the administration needs to watch out, that this could be a real problem for them. And this isn't even the first time we've heard that FEMA's budget is stretched thin. Remember earlier this year when Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas basically said that FEMA was running low on funds?
Yeah.
This whole thing with Lebanon just kind of adds fuel to that fire, you know?
Right.
It makes you wonder if the Biden administration can really handle multiple crises at once.
It definitely raises some questions. It makes you think about how we, as a country, should be handling aid when there are so many crises happening all the time.
It's true.
How do we balance taking care of our own citizens with helping out when there are humanitarian crises in other parts of the world? These are tough questions. There's no easy answer.
It's easy to get caught up in the politics of it all, the finger pointing, but at the end of the day, these are real people we're talking about. In North Carolina and in Lebanon, there are people whose lives have been turned upside down.
Exactly.
For the folks in North Carolina, it's about rebuilding their homes and their businesses,
Yeah.
getting their lives back on track.
Right.
And in Lebanon, it's about getting basic necessities and dealing with this huge humanitarian crisis, which has obviously been made even worse by the conflict there. They both need help.
That's the dilemma for policymakers. How do you decide which needs are more important?
Ex-
Is it just about who's closer? Or how much people are suffering? Or maybe it's about keeping promises we already made.
Right.
Each of those things matters. It's a constant balancing act, trying to figure out how to use the resources we have in the most effective and ethical way.
It's a tough situation no matter how you look at it.
Yeah.
No easy solutions.
Yeah.
So what do you think? What are the big takeaways here? What should we, as people who care about what's going on, be thinking about when we see these kinds of stories in the news?
I think the first thing to remember is that it's never as simple as it seems. There's always more to the story than what you see on the surface. The second thing is deciding where aid goes is a complicated process.
For sure.
There are legal issues, budget constraints, and of course, political pressure. But most importantly, we need to remember that this isn't just some abstract political debate. There are real people's lives at stake in both of these situations. We need to approach this with empathy.
Couldn't agree more. Well said. Well, folks, there you have it. We took a deep dive into aid, accusations, and the constant challenge of figuring out how to prioritize competing needs on a global scale. We looked at the specifics of this situation, we heard arguments from both sides, and hopefully we've given you something to think about.
It's a conversation that goes way beyond this one event. It makes us think about responsibility, resource allocation, and what it means to be a global citizen.
Absolutely. And as always, we encourage you to keep learning, keep asking those tough questions, and keep forming your own informed opinions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next time to explore another complex issue shaping our world.